The emergency signal screamed across every communication channel in the galaxy, static filled with desperation. The message was simple, terrible, and repeated in over 200 languages. "We are dying. Please help us." For 3,000 years, the Galactic Confederation had been the ultimate symbol of peace and progress. The elegant Etherians floated through their crystal cities like living light, their bodies made of pure energy that sparkled like captured starlight. They had mastered technology so advanced it looked like magic to younger species. Their homeworld was a masterpiece of glowing towers that reached toward the heavens, each one a work of art that took centuries to grow. The Zephyrians were the warriors of the Alliance, proud and noble with their massive warships that stretched for miles through space. These weren't just ships. They were floating cities, home to millions of crew members who lived their entire lives among the stars. Each dreadnought could level a planet's surface or protect entire solar systems with shields that bent space itself. Then there were the Vectar, the philosophers and scientists who could literally rewrite reality with their minds. They had learned to twist the laws of physics like clay, making impossible things happen just by thinking about them. When they fought, they didn't use weapons. They simply made their enemies forget how to exist. These three species, along with dozens of others, had built something beautiful together, a confederation where different worlds worked as one, sharing knowledge and protecting each other. Wars were ancient history. Violence was something primitive species did before they learned better. But deep in the void between galaxies, something ancient stirred. The swarm had been sleeping for millions of years, waiting for the galaxy to rebuild after the last time it had swept through like a plague of metal locusts. Now it was awake, and it was hungry. The Etherian homeworld died first. The beautiful crystal cities that had stood for thousands of years cracked and shattered as the swarm descended. Billions of energy beings flickered out like candles in a hurricane. The survivors who escaped could only watch in horror as their paradise became a feeding ground for machines that grew stronger with every beautiful thing they consumed. The Zephyrian Navy tried to fight back. Their massive dreadnoughts moved into position, weapons charging with enough power to crack moons. But when they fired, the swarm ships simply phased out of normal space, letting the attacks pass harmlessly through empty air. Then they reappeared inside the Zephyrian vessels, taking them apart from within. Mile-long warships that had never known defeat became twisted metal graveyards drifting through space. The Vectar attempted their reality manipulation, trying to simply make the swarm cease to exist. But these ancient machines had faced their kind before. They had learned to ignore the very concept of impossibility. When the Vectar reached out with their minds to rewrite the laws of physics, the swarm just kept coming, treating universal constants like mild suggestions. System after system went dark. Entire civilizations vanished in days. The Confederation's most brilliant minds worked desperately to find a solution, but everything they tried failed. Their technology was too advanced, too predictable. The swarm had been built to counter exactly this kind of thinking. As the outer colonies fell one by one, the surviving leaders made a choice that would have been unthinkable just months before. They sent out a universal distress call to every corner of the galaxy, begging for help from anyone who might have weapons, knowledge, or sheer desperate courage to fight what they could not. The response was mostly silence. The few species who bothered to reply sent polite messages explaining why they couldn't help. They had all read the old archives, the legends of the swarm's previous visits. This was a force that had ended galactic civilizations before. Getting involved was suicide. But then, from a small blue planet orbiting an ordinary yellow star in the outer spiral arm, came an unexpected reply. "This is Captain Tom Bradley of the Earth Defense Force." The voice crackled through subspace, distorted by primitive communication equipment. "We received your distress call. We hear you, and we're coming to help." The Confederation's emergency council fell silent. Earth, that little death world that every civilized species avoided? The planet was classified as Class 12, absolutely lethal to all known forms of life. The gravity alone would crush most species, and the surface was covered in toxic gases that even machines found corrosive. Nothing civilized could possibly survive there. Yet somehow, something did. Something that called itself human, and claimed to have a defense force ready to take on the most dangerous threat the galaxy had ever known. The council members looked at each other with expressions that mixed hope with disbelief. What could these primitive beings possibly do against an enemy that had defeated the greatest civilizations in galactic history? They were about to find out. Ambassador Kythera had seen many different species in her long diplomatic career, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. She floated awkwardly in her environmental suit aboard what the humans called a destroyer, though it looked more like a flying scrapyard to her trained eyes. The walls were made of thick metal plates welded together with visible seams. She could actually see the welding marks where human workers had joined the pieces by hand. Back on her homeworld, their ships grew themselves from living crystal, each curve and surface perfectly smooth and mathematically precise. This human vessel looked like someone had built it in their backyard with spare parts. The fusion reactor hummed and rattled in a way that made her nervous. Confederation power sources were silent, drawing energy from pocket dimensions or harvesting it directly from nearby stars. These humans were still burning fuel like some primitive species that had just discovered fire. Their faster-than-light drive was so basic it could barely maintain stable hyperspace tunnels. Captain Tom Bradley stood before a flickering holographic display that showed the swarm's movement patterns across several star systems. His uniform was patched in 3 places, and a long scar ran down the left side of his face from some old battle. Among her people, scars were healed instantly by medical technology. Humans seemed to wear theirs like badges of honor. "All right, here's the situation," Bradley said, pointing at the red dots representing swarm positions. "They've got us outgunned, outmanned, and out-tetched by about 1,000 years. Every time the Confederation tried to fight them head-on, they got stomped." Kythera's bioluminescent patches dimmed with worry. "Yes, our greatest military minds have been unable to find a conventional solution to the swarm problem." Bradley's scarred face split into what humans called a grin, a strange expression that showed teeth, which should have been threatening, but somehow wasn't. "Good thing we're not conventional, then. Direct assault against those things is pure suicide. So we don't fight fair." The translator in Kythera's suit made several beeping sounds as it tried to process this concept. "I'm sorry, Captain Bradley. Could you explain what you mean by not fighting fair?" "Simple. We're going to study them first. Figure out how they think, how they move, what makes them tick. Then we hit them where they don't expect it, when they don't expect it, with weapons they've never seen before." He gestured to his crew, who were busy at their primitive control stations. "See, we've had plenty of practice with asymmetric warfare back home on Earth." Lieutenant Amy Walsh looked up from her station, where she was coordinating with other ships in their small fleet. She was younger than the captain, maybe 30 Earth years, with short brown hair and the same casual confidence that seemed to mark all these humans. "Boss, the scout teams are locked and loaded. They're ready for their runs into swarm space." Kythera felt her bioluminescent patches flicker bright yellow, the color her species show when experiencing extreme alarm. "Scout runs? You mean you're sending people directly into swarm control territory? That's certain death. No ship has ever returned from those areas." Walsh turned to look at her, and Kythera saw something in the human's eyes that she'd never encountered before. Not fear, not even concern. It was excitement. "Ma'am, with all due respect, we're from Earth. Death traps are kind of our specialty." Around the bridge, other crew members chuckled at this comment. They were actually laughing about flying into what every military expert in the galaxy considered a suicide mission. Bradley pulled up another display showing Earth's surface. Kythera had seen the planet's classification files, but seeing actual images was different. Massive storms that could level cities. Oceans filled with creatures that existed only to hunt and kill. Volcanic activity that made the planet's surface shift and change without warning. Ice caps that advanced and retreated in cycles that would destroy most civilizations. "You have to understand something about humans," Bradley explained. "We didn't evolve on some nice, peaceful garden world like most species. Earth tried to kill us every single day for millions of years. Predators, diseases, natural disasters, climate changes that wiped out entire species. We survived all of it." Lieutenant Walsh pulled up tactical displays, showing the scout ships preparing to jump to hyperspace. "The way we see it, the swarm might be dangerous, but it's not any worse than a Category 5 hurricane or a pack of hungry wolves. and we've been dealing with those since we lived in caves. As the first wave of human ships disappeared into hyperspace, heading straight for the most dangerous region of space in the galaxy, Kathera finally understood what she was witnessing. These weren't just volunteers offering to help with a desperate military situation. These humans were actually looking forward to the fight. They had spent their entire evolutionary history learning to survive against impossible odds, and now they saw the galaxy's greatest threat as just another challenge to overcome. For the first time since the swarm had awakened, Ambassador Kathera felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. The first reports from the battlefield left the Confederation's military analysts speechless. The humans weren't just fighting the swarm, they were winning. And they were doing it in ways that violated every principle of modern warfare. While the Confederation had tried to match the swarm's incredible technology with their own advanced weapon systems, the humans took a completely different approach. They went backwards. Instead of building better energy cannons, they dug up weapons designs from their own violent history and started loading them onto spaceships. Nuclear mines were scattered throughout asteroid fields like deadly seeds waiting to bloom. These weren't sophisticated weapons by galactic standards, just primitive fusion bombs with basic proximity sensors. The swarm's advanced scanning systems were designed to detect and counter energy weapons, plasma cannons, and reality-warping devices. They completely ignored these crude explosives until entire swarm formations vanished in brilliant nuclear fire. But it wasn't just the weapons that shocked everyone. It was how the humans used them. Commander Jack Stevens had become something of a legend among both human and alien forces. He led a squadron of modified atmospheric fighters, aircraft that were never meant to leave a planet's surface, much less engage in space combat. His ship was a patchwork of welded armor plates, jury-rigged life support systems, and weapons bolted onto every available surface. Control, this is Bulldog Squadron. Stevens' voice crackled over communication channels as his fighters dove into a formation of swarm drones. We're beginning our attack run. Try to keep up with the fancy ships. The alien observers watched in disbelief as these cobbled-together fighters tore through swarm formations that had destroyed mile-long dreadnoughts just days before. Stevens' ship rolled and twisted between enemy fire with impossible precision, its crude maneuvering thrusters somehow outperforming the most advanced propulsion systems in the galaxy. The trick, Stevens explained during one particularly chaotic battle, his voice calm even as explosions lit up the space around him, is they're programmed to fight civilized people. Problem is, we're not civilized. The swarm's adaptive learning systems have been designed by an ancient civilization to counter the most sophisticated military tactics in the galaxy. They could analyze enemy formations, predict attack patterns, and develop countermeasures in real time. But human warfare didn't follow patterns. It was pure creative chaos. Lieutenant Ben Taylor turned his damaged cruiser into a guided missile, staying at the controls until the last possible second to ensure it hit the swarm's command ship. When Captain Lisa Park's destroyer lost its main engines, she used the ship's gravity generators to slingshot around a nearby moon and ram a swarm harvester at impossible speed. The humans even used weapons that should have killed them along with their enemies. Biological agents that were deadly to most forms of life had little effect on humans who had evolved on a planet where everything was already trying to poison them. Chemical weapons that would devastate other species were just another day at the office for beings whose own atmosphere was considered toxic by galactic standards. Colonel Mike Rodriguez led ground assault teams onto captured swarm facilities, using nothing more sophisticated than explosive charges and projectile weapons, guns that fired pieces of metal using controlled explosions. These weapons were so primitive that most galactic species had abandoned them thousands of years ago. But they worked, punching through swarm defenses that had been designed to stop energy beams and plasma bolts. You have to understand, Rodriguez explained to a group of confused Zephyrian military observers, on Earth, we've been shooting each other with these things for centuries. We know exactly how much damage they can do. As the battles continued, the alien species began to see patterns in human behavior that both fascinated and terrified them. When a human ship was damaged beyond repair, the crew didn't evacuate. They turned it into a weapon. When human soldiers ran out of ammunition, they kept fighting with whatever was available. When conventional tactics failed, they invented new ones on the spot. The casualty reports painted a grim picture. Humans were dying in numbers that would have caused any civilized species to surrender. But instead of retreating, more human ships kept arriving from Earth, their crews eager to join the fight. Ambassador Cathera watched the tactical displays with growing amazement and horror. She had studied Earth's classification files, but she was finally beginning to understand what they really meant. The planet wasn't labeled as a death world because it was empty or lacking in resources. It was uninhabitable because only the most incredibly tough and adaptable creatures could possibly survive there. And those creatures had spent millions of years learning to fight against impossible odds. Now those same beings, these humans who treated certain death as just another challenge to overcome, were fighting to save species they had never even met before. The galaxy had called for help, and the monsters from the death world had answered. The question was no longer whether the humans could defeat the swarm. The question was what kind of galaxy would be left when these incredible, terrifying, wonderful beings were done reshaping it. The war had been raging for weeks when Dr. Lisa Park made the discovery that would change everything. She wasn't a soldier or a ship captain. She was a xenopsychologist, someone who studied how different alien species think and behave. While everyone else was focused on weapons and tactics, she had been quietly watching hours of combat footage, trying to understand the enemy's mind. Dr. Park burst into command briefing looking like she hadn't slept in days, her brown hair messy and her eyes bright with excitement. The room was filled with battle-worn officers comparing damage reports and casualty lists. Captain Bradley looked up from a tactical display, showing their dwindling fleet numbers. "Doctor, we're kind of busy planning how to not get completely wiped out," Bradley said, though his tone was respectful. He had learned to trust the insights of non-military personnel during this impossible war. "That's exactly what I need to talk to you about," Park said, pulling up her own data on the main screen. "I've been analyzing the swarm's behavior patterns for the past 3 weeks. Every engagement, every tactical decision, every response to our attacks. And I found something incredible." The room fell silent as graphs and charts filled the display. Alien officers in the Confederation leaned forward, their various species all showing the same expression of desperate hope. "It's not just about technology," Park continued, her voice growing more excited with each word. "The swarm's collective consciousness, the way it thinks and makes decisions, it can't handle chaos. Everything it does follows perfect logic. It calculates probabilities, runs simulations, predicts outcomes. It thinks like the most advanced computer system in the galaxy." Commander Kate Morrison, her flight suit still smelling of smoke from her last mission, raised her hand. "Doc, that sounds like a good thing for them, not us." Park grinned, that same wild expression humans got when they were about to do something completely insane. "That's where you're wrong. See, the swarm was built to fight other logical species, beings who follow military doctrine, who make rational decisions based on careful planning. But humans..." Captain Bradley leaned forward in his chair, a smile slowly spreading across his scarred face. "We don't think logically." "Exactly." Park slammed her hand on the table. "We fight with emotion, with spite, with pure stubborn refusal to accept when we're beaten. We make decisions that don't make sense, and somehow they work. The swarm tries to calculate what we'll do next, but how do you predict someone who doesn't even know what they're going to do until they do it?" Lieutenant Ben Taylor, who had somehow survived his ship being cut in half during the last battle, started laughing. "So you're saying our biggest weakness, the fact that we're all completely crazy, is actually our secret weapon?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Park replied. "Every time we do something impossible, something that violates their tactical predictions, their system has to recalculate. And when we all do impossible things at the same time..." Captain Bradley stood up, his eyes gleaming with the kind of dangerous intelligence that had made humans the apex predators on their death world. Their system overloads trying to process it all. The final assault was planned in a way that would have horrified any civilized military academy. Instead of detailed battle plans and coordinated formations, every ship captain received the same simple objective: destroy the central nexus that controlled the swarm's collective consciousness. How they accomplished this was entirely up to them. The result was beautiful, Terrifying chaos that unfolded across 3 star systems. Lieutenant Ben Taylor took his half-repaired destroyer on what looked like a suicide run straight at the swarm's main defensive grid. At the last second, he used his ship's damaged gravity drive to create a localized space-time distortion that somehow catapulted him past the defenses. He crashed into 3 swarm nodes, destroying them all, and walked away from the wreckage with nothing more than a broken arm and a bigger grin than before. Commander Kate Morrison led her fighter squadron in a maneuver that her own tactical computer warned was impossible. She had her pilots fly in a formation that violated basic physics, using their ship's magnetic fields to create a resonance pattern that made the swarm's energy shields collapse. When alien observers asked her to explain how she knew it would work, she just shrugged and said, "I didn't. I just felt like it might." Colonel Mike Rodriguez simply threw away every military manual ever written. When his ground forces landed on the swarm's command facility, he told his troops to ignore all tactical protocols and just go break things. The result was a chaotic assault that somehow perfectly exploited every weakness in the swarm's defensive systems. Across the battlefield, the swarm's central consciousness tried desperately to predict and counter human actions. Its massive processing power ran probability calculations that grew more frantic with each impossible human decision. How do you calculate a response to an enemy who uses broken equipment more effectively than working systems? How do you predict someone who makes critical decisions based on hunches and feelings? The swarm's perfect logic began eating itself, trapped in endless loops trying to solve equations that had no rational answers. One by one, swarm nodes began shutting down, overwhelmed by calculations that would never resolve. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as humanity's greatest weakness became their ultimate strength. The silence that followed the swarm's defeat was deafening. Across 3 star systems, the massive mechanical hive that had terrorized the galaxy for months simply stopped. Swarm ships drifted powerless through space, their collective consciousness finally overwhelmed by the chaotic impossibility of human warfare. But there was no cheering on the human ships, no victory parades or celebration parties. The cost had been too high for that. Nearly 40% of the Earth Defense Force hadn't made it home. Ships that had left Earth with full crews now limped back to friendly space with half-empty corridors and too many empty chairs in the mess halls. Captain Bradley stood on the bridge of his battered flagship, looking out at the debris field that had once been the swarm's central nexus, and all he could think about were the friends who wouldn't be coming home to see their families. The Confederation's response was immediate and overwhelming. Within days of the victory, delegations from dozens of worlds arrived at the human fleet's position. They came bearing gifts that would have made entire civilizations wealthy beyond imagination. The elegant Etherians offered to share their energy manipulation technology, knowledge that could revolutionize human power generation for the next 1,000 years. The proud Zephyrians presented detailed blueprints for their massive dreadnoughts, along with the industrial capacity to build entire fleets. The philosophical Vectar even offered to teach humans their reality-bending sciences, powers that could make them gods among the stars. Territory was offered, entire star systems with rich planets ready for colonization. Resources flowed in from grateful worlds, rare elements, advanced materials, technological databases that represented millions of years of scientific advancement. Some species offered political positions, inviting humans to join the Confederation's ruling council with voting power over galactic policy. Captain Bradley, still wearing bandages from his final battle with the swarm, listened to each offer with patience and respect. When the last delegation finished their presentation, he stood slowly, his scarred face thoughtful. "We appreciate everything you're offering," he said, his voice carrying the weariness of someone who had seen too much war. "We really do. But we didn't fight the swarm because we wanted to rule the galaxy or get rich. We fought because you asked for help, and that was the right thing to do." Ambassador Kithera, who had spent the entire war aboard human ships, translated his words to the various alien delegations. But she knew they were missing something in the translation, the simple, matter-of-fact way Bradley talked about doing the right thing, as if risking everything to save strangers was just normal human behavior. "All we want is to be friends," Bradley continued. "Trading partners, maybe. You could help us with some of that fancy technology you've got, and we'll share what we know about Well, about surviving when everything goes wrong. In the weeks that followed, Kethera watched the humans with growing amazement. Instead of returning home to celebrate their victory, they stayed to help rebuild. Human medical teams worked around the clock treating wounded from dozens of different species, learning alien biology on the fly, and adapting their techniques with the same creative improvisation they had shown in battle. Human engineers descended on devastated worlds with toolboxes full of primitive equipment and heads full of impossible ideas. Where Confederation experts said repairs would take decades, human work crews found ways to get critical systems running in days. They didn't use the most advanced techniques or the fanciest materials. They used whatever was available, held together with determination, and what they cheerfully called good enough engineering. On the Etherian homeworld, human construction teams rebuilt crystal cities using a combination of alien energy shaping and old-fashioned human welding techniques. The result wasn't as elegant as the original structures, but it was stronger and it worked. On Zephyrian colony worlds, human farmers taught alien refugees how to grow food in contaminated soil using techniques developed in Earth's post-war zones. Most remarkably, Kethera noticed how the humans treated everyone, ally and former enemy alike, with the same fierce protectiveness they showed their own people. When they found surviving swarm prisoners, humans didn't execute them or abandon them. They studied them, learned from them, and even tried to reprogram some of the simpler units to help with reconstruction efforts. These weren't the monsters that the galaxy had expected from a Class 12 death world. These were guardians who had evolved on a planet so dangerous that cooperation and compassion had become survival traits as important as strength and aggression. Later, alone in her quarters aboard a human hospital ship, Ambassador Kethera accessed the Galactic database. Earth's file glowed on her screen with a familiar warning that had kept civilized species away for centuries. Class 12 Death World, avoid at all costs. Lethal to all known forms of life. She stared at those words for a long time, thinking about everything she had witnessed. Then she deleted the entry entirely. In its place, she typed, Class 12 Death World, inhabited by allies. After a moment's thought, she added a personal note that would be copied to every database in Confederation. When the galaxy faced extinction, they heard our plea when no one else would answer. They asked for nothing in return but friendship. Perhaps it's time we stopped fearing the Deathworlders and started listening when they speak. The message spread across the galaxy faster than any previous diplomatic communication. Within months, humanity's reputation had transformed completely. They were no longer seen as primitive barbarians from an impossible world. They had become something far more valuable and rare in a galaxy full of advanced civilizations. They were the people who came when you called for help, the Deathworlders who care enough to fight for complete strangers. And most importantly, they were the ones who had proven that sometimes the best way to solve an impossible problem was to ignore the rules entirely and just do what felt right. The galaxy would never be the same.